It is the Sengoku Jidai. Besieged and surrounded by his enemies, a lord pays a group of men to see his only child to safety. But do they have the skill to ensure her safety? And can they even be trusted? For this is an age of honor and treachery, of blood and valor, of gold and steel. Now available at Amazon, Smashwords, and at studiobrainstorm.net. Links in the description. Well, here's a bit of a shocker. The consistency continues. Of course, Miller's the writer for the entire series, but not only does Dustin Weaver return to the artist's chair, he actually stays there for all 3 issues of the arc. Thus far, he is the second best of the artists that worked on KOTOR the comic, so it is a welcome return. And we have Colin Wilson back as the cover artist. With that out of the way, Nights of Suffering begins where this whole story began, on Taris. Although unfortunately the planet isn't very recognizable thanks to it being invaded by the Mandalorians. Pause once again just to appreciate the unprecedented glory of the Basilisk War Droid. Screw you, it's my video. Besides, according to the cultural powers that be, you're not allowed to judge. The Last Resort attempts to make landing in the capital city itself, only to be ordered away by some Mandalorian air patrol. But not before it makes an important drop-off. A certain former Padawan. Disguised as a Neo-Crusader, Zane Carrick makes it safely to the ground, and then fights his way down into the lower levels of the city to reunite with our favorite mastermind Griff and his new unlikely associates, the Hidden Becks Swoop Gang. Brief pause in the story for explanation. Now we all know what a speeder bike is, right? Well, a swoop bike is basically that, but with an overpowered engine. In fact, it's sometimes called an engine with a seat in universe. Point of fact, Taris actually claims to be the birthplace of the swoop bike, and as consequence, the birthplace of the criminal organization known as the Swoop Gang and the sport of swoop racing, which is basically street racing in a galaxy far, far away. Once Mastermind and henchmen are reunited and reintroduced to Del Mumo, Griff reveals that he's got a direct link to Coruscant in spite of the jamming used by the Mandalorian invaders. He sends off a message to Coruscant, and give you one guess who came up with the call signs here. Coruscant, this is Mastermind. Minion has landed. Copy, Minion has landed. Good luck, Mastermind. Coruscant out. Ah, Griff, if you didn't belong to a species that's ugly as sin, I'd kiss you. With the message sent, everybody retreats back into the lower levels, where the Swoop Gang leader, Gaydon Thek, brings Zane up to speed on the situation. When the Mandalorians invaded Taris, everyone went underground, both the law-abiding citizens and the not-so-law-abiding citizens. Unlike many other swoop gangs, like the Black Vulkars, who used the invasion as an opportunity to loot and run wild, Gaydon and his Hidden Becks would very much like to fight on behalf of their homeworld and join the local resistance, which is currently being led by Taris's Republic Senator, Haydel Garavis. Negotiations were going well between the two, until Taris's chief constable, Noana Sauer, joined the senator. And apparently, this particular law enforcer had a stick so firmly up her ass that even in the midst of an invasion, she refused to work with criminals, so the negotiations have stymied ever since. Now that Zane's here, Gaydon essentially plans to hand him over to the constable and the senator in exchange for allowing the Becks to join the resistance. Not the nicest of homecomings, to be sure, but Griff is quick to assure Zane that he's got his own plan in the works. After hand-waving just how he and Slisk managed to survive the destruction of Sirocco and make it to Taris at all, the Snivian reveals that he and the Mumo brothers were sent to Taris on a paid assignment by Jervo Thalion, the head of Losan Industries and Taris's primary producer of swoop bikes. Like the Becks, Thalion too wants to find the senator. As to why he would send a Snivian con artist and hired thugs like the Mumo brothers, Ever since the invasion of Taris, the Republic's Chancellor has apparently been launching investigations into how Taris was admitted so easily into the Republic in the first place. And such an investigation might reveal certain facts about Losan Industries and Senator Garavis that Thalion would very much like to stay buried. Such as the fact that Senator Garavis used to be a hatchet man in the employ of Losan Industries, and that he'd ensured Taris's entry into the Republic by paying out huge bribes to several senators. In return for this and Garavis gaining special treatment for Losan Industries, Thalion had used his many zillions of credits and corporate muscle to get Garavis elected as Taris's first senator. In exchange for finding Senator Garavis, Griff convinced Thalion to get the bounties on his head cancelled, as well as drop the charges against him for the Padawan massacre. And once Griff found out that Zane was still alive and where he was, he held out the same deal for his henchmen. That's the mark of a good employer if ever there was one. Naturally, Griff, with his underworld experience and connections, was easily able to make contact with the hidden Becks. Now that Zane's here, all they have to do is make contact with the Resistance, use Griff's special communicator to put the Senator in touch with Jervo Thalion, and presto, the two of them are free men. What follows next is a little contrived, but not the worst example I've ever seen. While Griff is off discussing things with Gadon, Zane strikes up a friendship with a little Twi'lek girl whose brother is one of the gang. And once again I have to pause to appreciate Miller's excellent dialogue. I'm Mission, and I'm Fool's Errand, and that was the fool I follow. Like a lot of little children who make new friends, Mission insists on dragging Zane off to show him some secret she knows. At first, the secret seems kind of innocuous. Mission's brother, confusingly named Griff Vow, is keeping someone or something in a hidden containment cell, and he brings it regular meals apparently. Unfortunately, the two of them are then ambushed by Griff's partner and fellow hidden Beck, Brejik, and the gang took Zane's lightsaber when he arrived, so he's kind of defenseless. Fortunately, our Griff arrives on the scene at the same time, having come looking for Zane, and bringing with him his transmitter in its remarkably durable briefcase, and Del Mumo. And what the Ithorian thug lacks in brains, he more than makes up for in strength. Once that conflict is resolved, it turns out that what Griff and Brejik were keeping in the containment cell were Constable Sour's children. Brejik had kidnapped the pair and intended to ransom them back to their mother before the invasion had started. Even after the Mandalorians had arrived, he still hung on to them in the hopes of making money off of them if the opportunity presented itself. In a way, it now has. With the Constable's children, Gadon no longer needs Zane as a bargaining chip. Once final preparations are complete, the hidden Becks burst out of the lower levels and shoot their way through the Mandalorians so that they can get to the spot where they'd arranged to meet with Senator Garavis and the Resistance. And while I do think that Dustin Weaver is only second best artist in this series next to Brian Ching, I do like the way that he shows off his action scenes, especially on big panels and two-page spreads. Everyone arrives at the meeting place safely, only for Zane to nearly get shot by Shel Jelavan, the younger sister of Shad, whom she thinks was murdered by the former Padawan in question. And it turns out she's not the only one who's eager to kill him. Rana Tay is here, apparently on the orders of the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic himself. Everybody starts threatening to kill everybody else, and it requires Senator Garavis himself to restore calm. Tensions ease a little bit more when Gadon Thek returns Constable Sour's children to her. Naturally, he says that they found the kids rather than kidnapped them. Granted, Gadon didn't know Brejik had kidnapped the kids, but why complicate a narrative? At any rate, despite Rana Tay urgently demanding Zane's death, the senator is willing to take whatever help he can get. And to his credit, Gadon is willing to go to bat for the young man as well. Once the chance of getting shot is off the table, Griff begins setting up the transmitter in his armored briefcase so as to put the senator in contact with Jervo Thalion and complete his assignment. While he does this, Senator Garavis explains a bit of his backstory. All the stories about him bribing senators to get Taris admitted to the Republic and then becoming senator thanks to the corporate backing of people like Jervo Thalion are all true, but it would seem that once Garavis became senator, he discovered a sense of public spiritedness and genuine care for the people of his world. The former corporate hatchet man found himself becoming that rarest of things, a genuinely virtuous politician. After the riots broke out on Terrace following Zane and Griff's second escape, Jervo Thalion had decided to take Losan Industries and pull out. Given that Losan Industries was the planet's biggest job provider, the senator had gone after his former partner, pleading with him to come back. Then, when he heard that the Mandalorians were invading, he decided to return to Taris to lead his people against the invader. I really like this bit. It's a nice, simple, heartwarming moment in a series that's mostly action-packed and even goes to some pretty dark places. The best part, though, is that it's perfectly in keeping with what Star Wars is all about. Although never utopian like its great rival Star Trek, Star Wars has always been an optimistic universe. A place where, as long as you're genuinely willing to do so, there is always a chance to change for the better, and where even the most unlikely people can become heroes. In fact, it's perfectly in keeping with the quote that Miller said was his guiding light throughout this whole series. Alas, we must leave the warm fuzzies behind us as Griff finally makes contact with Jervo Thalion, and it turns out that relations between him and the Senator are still pretty bad. Apparently, Losan Industries has been taking a lot of hits from the Mandalorians, not just on Taris, but across the sector. Thalion even mentions a facility on Wayland that was destroyed so thoroughly there's no longer any evidence that it ever existed. Nice bit of a wink and a nod by Miller towards us Thrawn Trilogy fans. Now that the Senate is actually interested in looking into Goravis's past corruption, Thalion has arranged this whole scheme with Griff and the Mumo brothers not to help the Senator, but to eliminate him. Much to the surprise of Griff, but not Del Mumo. Luckily, Rana Tay, of all people, saves the Senator from the Ithorian, but Thalion, having planned for such a possibility, reveals that the briefcase also contains a massive explosive powerful enough to blow up the entire building. Except, it doesn't go off. Surprisingly, Del Mumo, who apparently really loves bombs, is the one to figure out what's going on. He deduces, which is an amazing statement in and of itself, that when the briefcase took the shot meant for Zane, the energy bolt must have overloaded the detonator, rendering the bomb completely useless. Realizing that he now has the advantage of his former associate, the good senator makes Thalion an offer he can't refuse. Thalion is to use his influence to get military support sent to Taris, particularly those ultra-powerful transmitters that will allow them to get past Mandalorian jamming. If he does this, the senator promises to forget all about his erstwhile partner in crime. All's well that ends well for the time being, and Griff has a panic attack over the realization that he's been carrying a bomb with him all this time. Meanwhile, aboard the Last Resort in orbit, Jarael is still trying to come to terms with Camper's departure. A sympathetic Roland and Alec try to take her mind off things with some sparring sessions, and it does work for a while, but she still can't quite get over her sadness. Afterwards, Alec, who's clearly had a thing for Jarael ever since Flashpoint, makes his first open advance towards her, but she's not quite ready for it. This brief interlude concludes with an ominous shot of Roland watching from the shadows, yet again Miller teasing us with a mystery that will not be solved until near the very end of the series. Meanwhile, back on Taris, Zane is still trying to come to terms with the fact that Shell, a girl that he was crushing on back before the Padawan murder, now hates his guts because she still thinks he's the one who murdered her brother. We learned that Shell was the person Zane sent that money to he got from Griff back in Reunion. Shell and her two brothers, the younger one we never see, were orphans, and Zane had sent the money so that they might be able to support themselves. Unfortunately, it seems that Shell used at least part of that money to try and put a bounty on Zane's head. Or at least, she tried to, but then the Mandalorians invaded and yada yada yada. Rana Tay interrupts the argument, and once again Miller does that same little word trick he did with Lucian when facing the Jedi Council. Then who killed my brother? I did. At least, that's what he's told himself. But you know the truth, Shell. I couldn't have killed your brother. Miller really does love his wordplay, doesn't he? Zane responds that technically yes, Rana Tay didn't kill Shad. She killed Camlin, the green female. Shad was killed by Canilia. each Padawan slain by his or her own master. At this point, it's pretty clear that Rana Tay has been playing Grima Wormtongue to Shell's Theoden. She accuses Zane of having fallen to the dark side, and the former Padawan responds with a pretty good retort. It also doubles as a nice callback to Reunion. Fine, Rana, whatever gets you through the night. Oh wait, you can't get through the night anymore, can you? A guilty conscience will do that to you. I guess we should be glad to know she has one. Once again, Senator Garavis has to step in and play peacemaker, and also inform everyone of a new development. Cassis Fett, right-hand man of Mandalore the Ultimate himself, has come to Taris to oversee the invasion, and that he's using the Tower of the Jedi Temple as his command center. Now, our unlikely band of allies have a target and a plan. Like most buildings on city planets, the Jedi Temple on Taris was built on top of an even older building. In this case, an old atmosphere control complex, with plenty of vents and tunnels that could allow someone access to the building above, without the Mandalorians noticing. The Resistance already has plenty of explosives, and now, thanks to the detonator from the briefcase provided by Jervo Thalion and recently repaired by Del Mumo, they now have a means of setting them off all at once, making an explosion powerful enough to take out the tower and hopefully Cassis Fett himself. Despite the Neo-Crusader reforms, many Mandalorians still buck against the idea of organization and discipline. But they obey Cassis Fett because they fear and respect him, both for his ruthlessness, his power, and the favor of Mandalore the Ultimate. Kill Fett, and the Mandalorians on Taris will be thrown into confusion and give the Resistance a fighting chance. It's a good plan, but Zane insists on making sure that Fett is actually there before they blow up the tower. Senator Garavis agrees and decides on a same-day recon to confirm Fett's presence. Zane, Shell, and Rana will infiltrate the temple to find Fett. Del Mumo and the Hidden Becks will set up the charges, and Griff, despite his best efforts, is roped into being the mission's communications officer. As the meeting breaks up, Rana takes Shell aside and does her worm-tongue thing again. She gives Shell the crystal from Shad's lightsaber, telling her that when they get inside the temple, she'll be able to grab her brother's lightsaber, insert the crystal, and use it to kill her brother's murderer. The third and final part of Nights of Suffering begins with a flashback. A young Rana Tay was looking for her instructor, Crinda Dre, only to overhear the older woman in the grip of a vision and an ominous prophecy. In the time of tribulation to come, there will be 5, one for the darkness and one for the light. Another from the darkness stands in the light, while one from the light stands in the darkness. The last one stands apart from all, and between them, all that has been built will fall. We then return to the present day where the recon team is putting the plan into motion. While Griff handles communications, and while Del Mumo and the Hidden Becks set up the explosive charges, the infiltration of the Jedi Temple commences. And here there is a decision made by Miller that I feel I have to question. Rana Tay infiltrates the tower via the air ducts, as was described in the plan. However, for some reason, Miller also decides to have Zane and Shell enter the temple via the front gate using the old escort the hostage trick. Why? Why not have all 3 infiltrators go up through the shafts? Why risk the frontal approach, which could lead to at least 2 of your scouts being outed and captured for interrogation? This might be the first example of weak writing on Miller's part in this series, as the only reason I can think of as to why they're doing it this way is so that Miller can have an excuse for another argument between Zane and Shell over whether or not he's in fact the killer of her brother. I do understand why this scene exists in the context of when KOTOR the comic was being released, because this was a monthly series, so maybe Miller thought the readers needed reminding of the fact that the relationship between Zane and Shell is effectively rock bottom. But a decade or so after the series' conclusion, reading the whole series in one go, it feels kind of unnecessary. Granted, it does have at least 2 redeeming features. The first being when Zane tries to explain the Covenant to Shell, and she's understandably skeptical of the idea of a secret cabal within the Jedi Order, which I do think is a valid criticism. As far as I know, based on my recollection of the Star Wars timeline from the Rakata Infinite Empire all the way up to the Legacy era, the Covenant and the Revankists are the only examples I can think of factionalism within the Jedi Order in its entire history. All the other internal conflicts within the Jedi Order's history inevitably resulted in a great schism and a new round of war with the Sith. And if we're being technical about it, the Revankists end up going that way too, even if the Jedi Civil War proved to be nowhere near as monumental as the four great schisms. Anyway, the second redeeming quality of this whole rehash is a moment where, in order to avoid suspicion, Shell kisses Zane and the Mandalorian watching says, "Leave him be, he's recruiting." Well, a wise man did once say that ladies like a man in armor. Of course, once the Mandos are out of sight, Shell immediately knees Zane in the groin. Though she does end up hurting herself in the process because Mandalorian armorers are no fools and they understand the value of protecting the codpiece. Once inside, the pair find themselves in an old storage room that contains, among other things, the Padawan's old lightsabers. While Zane isn't looking, Shell swipes her brother's saber and puts in the power crystal. Now it's a weapon. However, Zane starts reminiscing about the past times he had with the other Padawans, and his obvious grief over their deaths causes Shell to hesitate and not take the opportunity to kill him as she'd planned. Zane leaves Shell to wait for Rana while he goes on ahead to scout the location. Unfortunately, by the time he reaches the top of the tower, it turns out that Cassis Fett has already decamped. Not only that, he's figured out where the resistance is holed up and is leading a major assault on them. And just to put the cherry on top, Rana Tay chooses now of all times to arrive, and rather than try and warn the resistance, decides that killing the last Padawan from the Rogue Moon is far more important. Down below, the hidden Becks have received word of the resistance being under attack. Gaedon Thek immediately wants to pull back and help them, but Griff insists on staying to try and save at least Zane. For all Griff's amorality, and despite all the trouble Zane has caused him since he got roped up in the Padawan murders, Griff makes it pretty clear that he does know and appreciate the fact that Zane, for all his faults, is a genuinely good person and is someone worth saving. You weren't on Sirocco, Gaedon. If you had been, you'd know. The kid saves people's lives, whether he knows them or not, whether they deserve it or not, without being asked and without being paid. You said it yourself. Good help is hard to find. Meanwhile, back at the tower's top, despite her increasing mental instability, it's pretty clear that Rana Tay has Zane outmatched. Especially once she takes out the jetpack of his Mandalorian armor, taking away his maneuverability advantage. Her mental state eroded by weeks of sleepless nights and terrible nightmares, the Jedi Master begins to ramble. Besides a desire to end her nightmares once and for all, she reveals the prophecy of 5 and explains her belief that it dovetails with the prophecy of the Rogue Moon, that the 5 Padawans were the 5 that would bring down the Republic and the Jedi Order. After all, the 4 consulars had used their own second sight to try and foresee their own roles in the future to come. So it couldn't be 5 traitorous evil Jedi Masters, as Zane accuses. Standing over her defenseless victim, Rana remarks openly that she's now killed more than her fair share of Padawans. Such is the Jedi Master's derangement that she never noticed Shell coming up behind her to stab her through the back with her brother's lightsaber. Shell had heard every word and now had the final proof as to who the real murderers of her brother really were. But there's no time for reflection. Gaedon Thek and Griff arrive and lower a rope for the two of them to escape. Unfortunately, Rana Tay isn't nearly as dead as our heroes would like, a fact I find fairly questionable. I know lightsabers cauterize any wounds they create, but Shell would have just burned through a lot of vital organs, and last I checked, I don't recall anywhere saying that Togruta physiology is different from humans. At the very least, Rana should still be in shock. Still, she is at least weakened enough that she narrowly misses catching at Zane with a force jump. Things stall out briefly as Gaedon Thek has to reroute power to his engines in order to compensate for the extra weight, and Mandalorian air patrols are already hoving in. While this is going on, incredibly, in spite of everything Rana Tay has done, including trying to kill him just now, Zane offers to take Rana with them. And for just a moment, for the first time in months, the fear, the anger, and even the insanity falls away. Unfortunately, the Jedi Master's hand is stuck, and she lifts her lightsaber to try and cut herself free. Griff, too high above to hear the exchange between Zane and Rana, sees the lifted lightsaber and assumes that she's trying to attack him again. And so he sets off the detonator. Realizing that her fate is sealed, Rana Tay manages to say only to tell Krinda she's sorry before the Tower of the Jedi Temple collapses, taking her with it. His rerouting complete, Gadon Thek takes off, carrying Zane and Shell to relative safety. Elsewhere in the galaxy, Lucian and Cornelia feel Rana Tay's death, and they also know that now Zane knows the name of the Covenant's leader. Whew! The first of 3 climaxes, and we're barely halfway through the series. And while there are still plenty of plot elements that have yet to be resolved, I would say that so far, Knights of the Old Republic has delivered an excellent storyline. Miller began KOTOR the comic with an idea that was essentially an inverse of the prequel trilogy, a master betraying his student as opposed to the reverse. And while, by mostly focusing on Zane and his friends, the story does feel mostly fairly small and contained, Miller has also succeeded in making it feel like it's a part of a grander narrative, what with the backdrop of the early Mandalorian Wars and by bringing in characters from the games. Vandar Tokar, Vrook Lamar, Mandalore, Alec, Carthonasi, Admiral Karath, even Revan makes a cameo or two. The series has also touched upon various themes, prophecy being the overarching one, of course, what with the prophecy of the Rogue Moon and now the prophecy of 5. And given that Rana Tay has died exactly as she saw in her vision, on Terrace during a Mandalorian invasion, we the readers can clearly see that, much like in classical myth, such prophecies have a way of coming true even when you try to stop them, though not in ways that you might expect them to. After all, Rana saw herself being cut down, not crushed under a giant building. Rana Tay has played her role in the story well, though more as a physical threat to Zane than as an actual character, though her lack of personality beyond obsession with killing Zane is excused on the basis of her mental deterioration. Arko Adaska, for his part, was a far more entertaining villain, the kind of obvious charismatic slimeball that you just love to hate. With him, KOTOR the comic briefly played with themes of playing God with other people's genetics, as well as racism and hubris, even if Miller had to sacrifice exploration of those themes for the sake of the overarching narrative. At any rate, Adaska did well as a devious, hateable villain, and his death by space slug was very satisfying to say the least. The story thus far has given a few good moments of comedy, mostly out of Griff and the reintroduction of the Mumo brothers, and even the occasional heartwarming moment, like Senator Garavis' backstory, or Shell discovering the truth about her brother and exacting some small degree of vengeance for his murder, as well as her reconciliation with Zane. Sadly, while not terrible by any means, I think the weakest part of the story thus far mostly revolved around Camper. And this is mainly down to the fact that of the 4 principal characters, he got the least amount of development and attention before he departed the story for good. He mostly served as a kind of deus ex machina whenever a technical solution to a problem was needed, or when he had his memory problems played with for comedy. He's not bad or poorly written, and the revelation of his backstory is genuinely fascinating, and Adaska using him and Jarael as hostage for each other's good behavior does establish just how much they care for each other. I can't help but feel that Camper was not given nearly as much attention as maybe he should have gotten. As such, his noble sacrifice at the end of Days of Hate does seem to lack a little of the emotional impact that I think Miller was trying to aim for. All things considered, though, Miller did indeed deliver on the idea that the Days and Nights saga of the series would depict events in the Republic going from bad to worse. Even as our heroes have won small victories against foes like Adaska and Rana Tay, the Covenant still remains a clear and present danger to their safety, and with events like the destruction of Sirocco, the loss of the Republic fleet, and Cassus Fett attacking the Resistance directly at the end of Nights of Suffering, it's clear that, so far, the Mandalorians are still winning the war. At this point, Knights of the Old Republic the comic had been releasing for 2 years straight and was going strong. However, while he and his artists were creating this particular arc of the series, Miller would be approached by the editors of Dark Horse with an interesting proposal to incorporate into his storyline, a crossover event, and its name is Vector. Until then.